Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today we have a hand from a $1,000 buy-in tournament that illustrates a very important point you have to master if you want to succeed at poker tournaments long term, and that is how to play pairs plus draws, especially when the pair is marginal. So here we raise with King Jack of Hearts. We're playing very deep stacked, as you can see, 250 big blinds deep. We get two callers in the blinds. Flop comes King, Queen, 10, 2 diamonds. Now, right off the bat, you want to be asking yourself, what do the pre-flop callers' ranges look like? Now, the big blind's going to have all sorts of stuff, right? That makes sense. He's closing the action, 200 more into 1,000 pot. He's going to call with a lot of stuff. But what do most competent small blind players call with in this scenario? That's going to be a lot of big cards and suited connected cards. And that actually connects pretty well with this board. So if our opponent has ace-jack, we lose. If he has jack-9, we lose. If he has king-queen, queen-10, king-10, all of those hands make a whole lot of sense. And if he does have a hand like 8-7, he's just drawing dead or nearly dead, right? So this is a spot where I have no problem with value betting. And I think value betting could very easily be the right play when they check to me. But a very nice play here is to just check behind. Because notice there really aren't that many bad turns for me. I mean, I suppose a jack is not great. Queen and 10 are not great. Diamonds are not great. But it's not like they're terrible, right? It's important to realize that just because some cards may appear bad does not mean that you just lose every single time they come, right? So this is a spot where I can vary my play between checking or betting. But if I did have a hand like, let's say, jack-10, then I would definitely check. And I think that's really where a lot of people go wrong, and that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. A lot of people think that a pair plus a draw is a hand that they just have to bet because either they're good right now or they could improve to the best hand later. But in reality, what happens is when you're betting with the pair plus a draw, what's going to call you? Well, mostly better made hands, right? And those better made hands in this scenario are going to be a king or a queen. And those are actually pretty strong, and they're not going to fold all that often unless the board gets scary. So you're putting money in now in a situation where you are, 50-50-ish. But whenever you don't get there, when you don't improve, they're not going to fold. But when you do improve, very often they will fold. So you find yourself in this scenario where you have a bit of reverse implied odds to some extent with your draw, which is normally not the case. So when you have a marginal made hand and a draw, you just don't need to be betting. You typically want to be betting your draws when they lack showdown value. But when you have a pair to go with it, you don't need to bet. So anyway, in this scenario, bet or check, I think either play is acceptable. This time we do check, so let's see what happens. On the turn, they check to me again, and now it's very important to recognize this hand, King-Jack, is almost always the best hand. On the flop, it was probably the best hand, but on the turn when they check to me twice, it is definitely the best hand, so now I want to value bet. And when you are value betting this spot, I'm essentially saying, I think my hand is very good. I'm going to bet purely for value and a bit of a protection. And in this scenario, you want to ask, what is going to call me if I bet? And in this spot, we're trying to get called by a worse king, which is going to call any realistic amount, a queen, which is going to call any realistic amount, or a 10, right? Or a flush draw. All these hands are going to be very happy to call a relatively big bet. So in this scenario, when the pot's 1,000, I like a pretty big bet. I do go 900. I think this is very nice. One thing you'll also find is that whenever you do have a pair plus a draw, well, whenever you have a good top pair hand and it checks through on the flop, whether you're the pre-flop raiser or the pre-flop caller, either one, very often it's nice to be betting big with your hands like this that are almost certainly good that also don't necessarily mind protection. So we do bet 900. Big blind calls, which is fantastic. He's going to be in very bad shape in this spot. And now the river is a 10 and he checks. So in terms of bad rivers, this one's pretty bad because, like I just said, if he had a queen or a 10, he's not going to fold. But I do think we have the best hand a ton. And I think we can conceivably get called by a worse made hand, a queen, if we don't bet too big. Whenever you do check behind on any betting round, a lot of players are going to immediately think that you do not have a very good hand, which is probably true. So they're going to start discounting your range. And if they discount your range, they're going to think that maybe the best hand I can have here is a king. And if that's the best hand I can have here, then a queen's actually not all that bad because they're still beating all the bluffs. And there are some obvious bluffs here, right? Like Jack-8 may not bet the flop, although I probably would. 9-8 is a hand that I could definitely have in this scenario that I'd like to bet. Same thing with 8-6. Same thing with 9-6. These are all hands that I would probably just check behind on the flop with because they are not good at all. But when they turn some additional equity, I would definitely consider bluffing them. So in this situation, when you're value betting a decent made hand, but one that is going to have a hard time getting called by too many worse hands, because notice here, like it doesn't matter if he calls with a king because we're chopping. I'm trying to get called by a queen when I'm betting, or a random 7. How much will those hands realistically call? And this is where you have to pay attention to your opponent's tendencies. Obviously, we're very early in this live $100 or $1,000 buy-in tournament, so I don't know my opponent's tendencies. But this is a spot where I think across the board, most people will only call a small bet with a queen. So if the pot's 2,800, I like a pretty small bet here, like 1,000, and that is what I do. I think this is quite nice. If I do get raised here, this is what a lot of people fear. It's a dicey spot. With this hand, not knowing my opponent at all, I'd be pretty tempted to call. Because if you think about my range, when I check behind the flop, yeah, I could have some 10s, but I wouldn't bet any of the 10s on the turn. If I did have Jack 10 on the turn, by the way, I definitely would have checked because it's a marginal made hand, right? They cannot get called by too many worse hands. So I don't actually have very many 10s in my range. So since I don't have very many 10s in my range, that means the best hands I can have here are pocket 7s and then a king, right? And if those are the best hands I can have and I'm getting raised, well, I obviously not folding pocket 7s, but I probably should call with a king in this scenario. We also block a straight, which is nice. Obviously, the opponent could just have a 10. I mean, a lot of people will play a 10 in exactly that way. But with no reads in the beginning of a tournament, in a pot that's not gigantic, I'm going to be pretty willing to call. However, I've been accused of being a calling station. And if you play in games where your opponents literally never bluff the river, which is the case in a lot of small stakes games across the whole world, you would be lighting money on fire to call the raise. And this is actually an interesting concept to give a lot of smaller stakes players trouble as they start to move up to higher and higher stakes. They run into better players who are capable of having bluffs in their range at all points, especially when their opponent takes this line of betting like he has a king on the turn and then betting small on the river as if he's trying to get value from a king. My hand is a bit face up as a marginal made hand. So if it's face up as a marginal made hand, good players are going to be induced to raise. So that means I can't fold, right? But if your opponents are not thinking on that level at all, they're just thinking, oh, I have a 10, I raise, or oh, I don't have a 10, I fold. Well, then obviously calling raise would be very, very bad. So anyway, in this scenario, we do bet, opponent calls, and we win a nice pot, and we get a little bit of value. I think this is a situation where a lot of people, especially if they had Jack 10, mess it up by betting the flop, betting the turn, and then, well, they would have got there, but they would have bluffed the river. Well, they would have bet the river. And I think that's a big, big, big mistake. Whenever you have a marginal made hand, that hand value often overrides the draw portion of your hand. Because by the river, what are you most likely to have? Well, you're still most likely to have that marginal made hand. So especially in situations where conserving chips matters, you definitely want to err on the side of caution. Not that it matters here. We're playing 250 big blinds deep, right? If I lose 50 big blinds, it's not a big deal. But marginal made hands typically want to get closer to the showdown, so play them in a manner that allows that to happen. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, click like, click subscribe, share it with your friends. Thanks again to Poker News for hosting this. Good luck in your games. Have fun. I'll talk to you next time.